I'm John Lowry, principal here at Shades Cahaba. This is my 7th year as principal and my 10th year here at Shades Cahaba overall. I started in 2010 as assistant principal and then became principal starting with the 2013 school year.
Welcome to the Shades Cahaba Oral History Project. I'm your host, Sean Wright. This is the inaugural episode, and I'm glad you joined us. I started this podcast to support and celebrate the 100th anniversary of Shades Cahaba School. For the duration of this podcast, we will tell the stories of the people who attended the school, worked there, or had a hand in making the school what it is today. Hopefully, we can share stories about that school that you didn't know about and maybe give you a little history lesson. We may also veer off and share some special episodes where we talk about Shades Valley High School, Rosedale High School, Homewood High and Middle Schools, and our fellow elementary schools. Who knows what we might share with you. Now, to make sure you don't miss a single episode, subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you subscribe to podcasts. You can also listen to the stories at shadescahabahistory.com. You heard him introduce himself at the beginning, but it's my pleasure to introduce you to my first guest, the current Shades Cahaba Elementary School Principal, Dr. John Lowry. Thanks for coming on my podcast and helping us kick this off. This is our first episode. A lot of the people who are listening to this, they're not going to know anything about Shades Cahaba today. Mm-hmm. Tell me about Shades Cahaba. What's the class size like? What are we looking at?
So Shades Cahaba, as if you're listening to this, you probably know, and of course I'm biased, but it's the best elementary school on the planet.
That's okay.
Always has been and always will be, and that's because we've got great kids, great parents, and great teachers. So right now we have 506 students as of this morning. That is small for us. We have gone down in size the past 3 years roughly. We peaked about 2015-16 school year. We had close to 560 kids. I think there was a time period before I got here where we bumped up against 600 for a couple of years, and now we've slowly we've had a bubble of kids come through, and we've dropped back down to what this building was intended to house.
We've heard about that at the high school and other places, that there's a wave of kids coming through, a lot of kids, and I guess that's the wave that we were talking about. They've already gone through here.
Yeah, the 5th grade that just left, that's now in 6th grade, it was our last large group of kids. So as they left, and then we had a normal, smaller than normal group of kindergartners come in, we dropped down quite a bit, and that's happened for a couple years in a row now.
Back when my brother was in school here, back in the mid-'70s, I believe my mom was PTA president at the time, and she was telling me that they had so few students that they were actually considering closing this elementary school and just having the 2 elementary schools.
Wow.
Yeah, it's hard to believe now. And what are the grades? What do we have here?
So we have kindergarten through 5th grade. The past couple years, we don't have it this year. We had a preschool class that was not a Homewood City program. It was through the JCCEO, which is the Jefferson County Early Education Opportunity Program, and they house preschool programs around the city in different areas, and we had space for them. So they had a room here, but the Homewood program is kindergarten through 5th grade, and we have about 5 teachers in each grade level, and anywhere from 16 per class in some of the smaller or the early grades up to 22 per class in some of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade classrooms.
I just remembered that you said that there were less than 600 students here, and 600 was the top end. Mm-hmm. Back when this was a high school and it was 1st through 12th grade, there was a time, I believe there were at least 1,200 kids in this building.
That blows my mind.
And there were less rooms than there are now.
Yeah, I have no idea where they put them all.
I don't either.
I have seen some pictures of in some of the older yearbooks of some of the classrooms where there's 38 kids
Right.
in one classroom. So that makes a difference.
Right. So what about honors or recognitions? Anything going on at the school?
We've had quite a run with our character ed program, and it's going back about 18 years now. Mm-hmm. We started around 2001, 2002 with implementing what we've called the Shades Cahaba Way. Everybody that has been in this building in the past 16, 17 years knows what the Shades Cahaba Way is. It's a group of 7 statements that kind of define what we expect for everybody that's part of our community to follow. And we put those together to kind of have a common language here at school through an organization called character.org. They recognize schools around the nation for their character practices and character programs, and our Shades Cahaba Way earned what was called a promising practice in 2004. We applied for National School of Character through character.org in 2006. For the first time, Shades Cahaba was recognized as a National School of Character. At the time, I think there were 38 other schools in the country that were recognized. The designation is good for about 5 years. So in 2011, we reapplied and were designated a 2012 National School of Character. In 2017, we applied again for the third time and were recognized again. And we've just kind of learned that the application process that we go through gives us a lot of information about how we're doing. And that's the benefit of doing it. And it's nice that they recognize that we've got some good things happening in the building. But the good part of it is the process of investigating what you're doing, getting feedback about that, and then trying to improve. So we've had that go pretty well for us over the past 16, 17 years. In 2015, for the second time, Shades Cahaba was recognized as a Blue Ribbon School of Excellence. We were one of 5 schools in Alabama that year. That's not an application thing. It's just we just got a nice email saying, nice. Hey, you're going to be one of them for this year. So we were pleased about that.
I've always been pretty happy with the Shades Cahaba Way. When my oldest son, who's a junior at the high school now, when he came through, that's when we were first introduced to it. And every year we always heard about it. And I always felt that really paid off when those kids got to middle school, because that's such a tough time. And I think it was instilled in those kids that this is the way we do things and this is how you treat each other and stuff like that. And it seemed to me that it made an impact just from my vantage point as a parent at the time. So
yeah, there's definitely some truth in the repetition that comes along with that. The kindergartners hear it. I talk about it every day on the announcements. So by the time they leave here in 6 years, if they don't know it, it's because they weren't listening, because we sure do talk about it a good bit. But I do think that repetition does pay off down the road, because the kids remember, and we've had lots of kids come back to visit, and they remember the Shades Cahaba Way, and they recognize that some of the statements have changed and things like that.
A lot of people who are old school like myself, they don't even know about the office that we're sitting in now and the library and this construction that happened back in the late 80s and early 90s. You've been doing some stuff here lately. What kind of construction, what's changed here at the school in the last couple of years?
Yeah, so the school has got a really nice new cosmetic upgrade, I guess is what you could call it. New carpet, new wallpaper, new paint in areas where we don't have wallpaper. The lunchroom has been updated with new flooring, new paint, new furniture, even a whole new layout in there. And that's the extent of kind of the things that you can see. Of course, there's been a lot going on with some of the internal parts of the building, our security cameras, our the way the doors lock and things like that, the heating and cooling, the building management side of it. There's a whole new technology that comes with that
Right.
that we didn't have even 10 years ago.
Pretty big upgrades for a 100-year-old building.
Yes, lots of upgrades, and anybody that's done a home remodel here in Homewood knows that when you get into an old facility and start tearing out walls and doing things, you end up sometimes with a little more than you had planned on, and that's certainly been the case here. But this is a beautiful building, and it's got amazing bones, and it's held up well.
The one thing that people ask me about on Facebook and other places is they all say, are those beautiful wood floors still there? And I say, well, they're carpeted. And they said, but do they squeak? And I said, yes, they still squeak. So that's what everybody remembers, the floors and the squeaks.
Yeah, the floors do squeak, even to the point that the way the lights in the building work, or they click on and off with sound. So if you're in a room and you're quiet and still for a few minutes, the light will turn off, and then when you move and make some noise, the lights will click on. But if you're here in the building early or late before everyone else, and you walk down the hallway, the floors will squeak, and then all the lights will come on at the same time because they pick up the noise.
Oh, that's great. Your first connection is that you're a principal. I know you've got another connection to Shades Cahaba. What's that?
Yeah, so my wife, we have been married for 16 years now. She went to elementary school here, and Tricia Simpson, who was former principal of Edgewood Elementary School, was also assistant principal here at Shades Cahaba, was her kindergarten teacher when she started school here. So lots of ties to
that was probably good for the resume.
Yeah, it didn't hurt for sure.
We actually have a picture of Mrs. Simpson on for one of our banners. We're doing some celebrations in October that we're going to talk about on the next podcast a little more. It'll be the same day as Owl Prowl, and I'll put more information on that in the show notes. But we have one of the banners actually has her kindergarten classroom. So
yeah, I think it's the 80s, 90s banner. I've seen that picture.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about principals. You are just the most current principal in a really short list of principals. There's only been 9 principals since we started out here. So the first principal was James M. Ward, and he stayed for 23 years until 1943. And these kids, whether they know it or not, see him every day because I saw his pictures out there in the office, in the lobby. He's overlooking Karen Baggett, making sure she's doing her job. He taught here. His wife taught here at the same time. And they actually lived in downtown Homewood, which is, I think it was right around where Soho is, or maybe right where Soho is, was their house. So they were here for years. And then right after him in 1943, R.B. Nichols came next. And he was the principal. And when the high school left, when they started Shades Valley High School, he actually stayed here and stayed as the elementary school principal. One of the men that I interviewed for this podcast was telling me that he just loved Mr. Nichols, that he was this mountain of a man. They said he was huge, but he loved kids, and he would come in and read to everybody and stuff. So in my mind, I like to think that he just didn't want to deal with the high school kids, and he just stayed with the little kids. Next, in the 60s, we started with Lelton Cobb, who I understand was also a great guy, and then Margaret Vines followed him. So they finished out the 60s. My principal, when I was here, was Louis Levon, and he started in 1970 and went to 1981. He was such a great guy. I really liked him. I was surprised that we started at the same time. I just assumed he had been here for years and years. So that got us through the 81s. And then what always surprised me was the principal in 1981 was Mike Miller. And he was here for, I guess about 10 years or so. Mike Miller, for me, was my assistant principal at the high school. So he was the heavy at the high school. He took that role on, and then he came over here. And I always thought that was odd, and I hope to talk to him sometime soon. And the next after him was Karen Delano. Did you know her?
I didn't know her. I have gotten to know her over the years since I've come to Shades Cahaba.
I understand she had a distinguished career here in the Homewood school systems. So she was here. And then next came Sue Grogan in 2000, and she stayed here for 13 years. And you were her assistant principal at the time.
I was. I was her assistant principal, and lucky for me, I got to spend a few years learning from her. And she was an amazing principal, and I hope that I live up to some of the great things that she did. She was amazing.
Yeah, I met her at the kindergarten popsicle party that they had for Aiden's group, and she came over and tapped me on the shoulder, and she said, "I don't know if you remember me, but I was one of your youth counselors at church." And I thought, oh no, I've already ruined it for my son. And she remembered, but she said she had good memories. So then you started in 2013. The way I see it is we've got some people who put in some serious time at the front end, and then some who did their 10 or 13 years. So are you going to be a 13-year, or are you going to put in the long stretch?
You know what? If they will have me, I will stay around. This is like I said, this is a great place, great families, great kids, great teachers. And when you're a principal of a building with all of these different people and they're all pulling in the same direction, it makes your job a lot easier, and allows you to stay around a little bit longer than I think is typical for a person in this position.
Mm-hmm. All right, so if you've stumbled across this podcast and you have no idea about the history of Shades Cahaba or the history of Homewood and Shades Valley, I'm going to kind of get you up to speed on that. Back in the early 1900s, this over-the-mountain area was the country. It was tough to get to from Birmingham. There were no Red Mountain expressways, and even the road going over at Vulcan was pretty difficult to get over. So this was the country. So this area we're talking about is like Mountain Brook. It's what's Homewood now, and goes all the way out to the Oxmoor Valley. And it was really settled by people who obviously were looking for land. Some people called this area Death Valley, but they settled in Edgewood, and they settled out in Oak Grove, which is now West Homewood, and out that way. People came in and started settling in Mountain Brook as well. Eventually, and over the years, people started moving here to get away from the smog in downtown Birmingham. And I found this ad in the 1928 Owl Yearbook from Nelson Real Estate Company, and I believe they might have been the developers for all this Hollywood land. And in the ad, the headline was "Hollywood, out of the smoke zone into the ozone."
That's great.
There were all schools throughout Shades Valley, according to the book Homewood, The Life of the City. It said there that some children in Edgewood actually attended school in a log cabin. And I bet that was probably Mr. Griffin's family. And we're going to interview him in a future episode. Now, the Rosedale community had schools for both white and black children. I know the Rosedale school had started back about that time. Ms. Kate Cummings taught children out of her house on Oxmoor Road. And then there was this academy called the Zelosophian Academy, and it was founded in the Oak Grove community back in 1883. Now get this, the school was listed in the book Where to Educate, 1898 to 1899, a guide to the best private schools, higher institutions of learning, etc. in the United States. And this was a book published by Brown and Company. So it was a national book that they put out there, and it really had some nice things to say about them. It was under the Presbyterian influence, whatever that means. It had primary, preparatory, and collegiate studies. They taught music and art, and special attention was paid to English and the study of Alabama. As more and more people moved into Shades Valley here, they had a greater need for more and more schools. In 1907, the state and then Jefferson County passed what was called the high school law. That called for at least one high school in each county. Now, it took until 1916 for Jefferson County to open a high school, which was in Boyles, which I believe is now Tarrant. So there was a Jefferson County school there. This kind of threw me off. They had the trolley about this time, and kids were going across the mountain and down into Tarrant to that school. This confused me, but we're talking about Shades Valley and Shades Cahaba and all this was in the Jefferson County school system. Birmingham had a school system, and there were schools there. So there was Central High School, which was also known as Birmingham High School, and it was replaced by Phillips when it burned. There was Parker High School, which was the black high school. There was Paul Haynes School, which when Edgewood burned in 1953, they bused all the kids to that empty school and used it until they repaired Edgewood. Some kids actually went to Birmingham schools. They paid tuition and went there, or they went to Tarrant. At about the same time, two Zelosophian Academy graduates, was Will Frank and William Acton. They successfully led a campaign to open a school south of Birmingham. And what they had to do is they had to create a special school district. And voters in that district approved a special tax to construct this school. Let me explain this district to you. It was huge. It was 100 square miles. It extended from the Birmingham line to the Cahaba River, typical over the mountain area right now. And then it extended from Shannon, which is out by Robert Trent Jones Golf Course, all the way to Argo and the St. Clair County line.
Wow.
And so this is where all the kids are coming from. And I'm thinking back when they were talking about maybe moving Homewood High School to West Homewood, and I live on the east side of Homewood, and I was like, I can't believe I have to drive that far to the high school. And these people were coming from almost St. Clair County. That blew my mind. They got it going. They got the taxes done. That was the beginning of when people in Homewood and the over-mountain communities really wanted to support their school system, which, in my opinion, has never wavered. So they started construction of the school we're in now in 1919, a 3-wing brick building at the cost of $52,000, which probably didn't pay for that lunchroom, did it?
No.
And they opened the school in September of 1920. That's the beginnings of Shades Cahaba. And in the next episode, we're going to talk about the 1920s and opening up the school and what it took to support that school and the people who kind of helped out with that. That's where we're going to end this episode of the Shades Cahaba Oral History Project. That's it. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Absolutely.
And,
Thank you for all of your work on this. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks. Thanks for listening to my conversation with current Shades Cahaba Elementary School Principal, Dr. John Lowry. I appreciate him taking the time at the end of a long school day to help us kick off this podcast. If you'd like to share your Shades Cahaba experiences, reach out to me. You can find my contact info at shadescahabahistory.com or in the show notes. I'm especially interested in information about the high school, but I welcome all stories. The Shades Cahaba Oral History Project is sponsored by SeanWrightArt.com. Yes, that's me. When you visit, look for the link to Shades Cahaba and you'll find shirts and accessories featuring the exclusive Shades Cahaba Centennial Logo. This logo is based on an image on the cover of the OWL yearbook back in the 1920s. It's been updated to celebrate the 100 years of the school, and it helps us to offset the cost of producing and publishing this podcast. That's SeanWrightArt.com/Shades Cahaba.